Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Hatteras Hoops, who is a senior associate at Booz Allen Hamilton supporting the commercial vertical in the European market based in The Hague, Netherlands. He has over 20 years experience spanning defense, national security, and commercial cybersecurity missions. His current focus transcends strategic consulting, governance, and human-centric security solutions. Hatteras believes the cliche that humans are the weakest link should be replaced with a mantra that humans are an organization's greatest asset. Hatteras Hoops, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
John, thanks for having me, and really happy to be here.
Okay, likewise. And so the conversation that I'd like to have with you today, Hatteras, will discover your thought leadership and efforts related to human domain security and its relevance across the public and private domains, sectors. So could we please start, however, with your assessment of our strategic landscape, or if you prefer, the times in which we live?
Yeah, John, I think it's important to kind of look at where we are in the movie, and a lot of folks think about things in terms of a cyber activity versus a human activity, right? And one of the things that we are seeing as a result of COVID, and how we went to a kind of more remote working environment, was that because of that, organizations put a lot of sensors, and they put a lot of investment into protecting that remote access. And so for adversaries, that's driving the cost of their operations up. And so at some point in the very near future, we anticipate that break point on cost will teeter in the direction of more human-based access to systems. So the reason why I think right now is an important point, because we have seen this wave of activity. If you look back through history, and when I started exploring this, we looked at all as far back as Sun Tzu. There is a series of historical events where this is a repeated kind of activity, and rather than waiting for this wave to get us, I say, why don't we prepare now?
To our audience, you are living in The Hague, and actually, before we started recording, you were sharing with me that you and your family just got finished purchasing a house. But
That's right.
So how does this problem space fit into what you're doing in Europe and Booz Allen's footprint in the European market space?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, it's been an interesting journey, right? I mean, I kind of accidentally did 20 years supporting, in the uniform, and and then as a consultant supporting national security and defense. And I got an opportunity to come to this place called The Hague, right, and support the international commercial business. And so I just kind of came over and looked at my skill set, looked at the things I liked to do, things that I did well. And so I've kind of fit into this role that looks at governance, that looks at threat, and looks at human security solutions, right? So we can help kind of bring something like an Insider 2.0 to a place like Europe, or to a place where something like Insider Risk would just never fly. And there's a small group of us here in Europe, and in the UK and the Netherlands, to be honest with you, as we kind of talk about this more, it is the leadership culture that we have here is kind of to be honest, when I was being brought over, one of our leaders, he said, okay, yeah, I know humans, and then that's the challenge, but everyone talks about humans being the weakest link, but what's your plan? What are you going to do about it? And I thought about that for a long time, and then I met the people that I work with, and I said, wait a minute, I think there's actually a solution here. So that's kind of where this started.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Back at the top when I was, giving an introduction, you are fond of referring to the common saying that humans are the weakest link, which is referred to frequently in a security context, and replacing it with humans are an organization's greatest asset. I mean, do you think maybe you could use that as a jumping off point to talk about human domain security and the way you think about the problem set?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, working with some of my counterparts in Booz Allen, and sitting here in The Hague and in the Netherlands, and having European-based clients, right? Privacy is really important.
Mm,
And we had clients who were asking us, for doing some of this type of work, but we had these constraints that we had to really factor in. And we had a discussion. We said, hey, wait a minute. We're thinking about this all wrong, right? We're trying to defend against the insider. What we need to do is we need to, in a more positive, kind of constructive approach, find a way to help secure the people, treat people as kind of critical assets, and find ways to protect them, and not kind of assume negative, but kind of assume that they can use help. They can be helped in a direction and avoid disaster by taking proactive steps.
mm. We had a nifty discussion, and we'll put a link in the show notes to our audience. Oh, yeah, and by the way, to our audience as well, we are recording this on Wednesday, June the 5th, 2024. But about a year ago or so, we had a discussion with a gentleman named Jonathan Roginski. He's at West Point, and on insider threats. And I think, I'm curious whether or not you listened to that episode or not, Hatteras. Number one, but as I recall, he and his colleagues are working on ways that may align with the kinds of things that you were just talking about, where building an organization in a way where insider threat just doesn't have the oxygen or doesn't have the soil to thrive or grow or even
Yep.
start because of just the way the organization and its culture and the way it's put together, just doesn't allow for that kind of activity to flourish. And it could, I guess, be everything from, so the sidebar, or there's a famous Russian author, and this is to our audience again. This is John Bicknell in real time. I'm going to get the name wrong, but the famous author, it's something like Sojanisky. I don't remember the fellow's name. We'll put a link in the show notes. But one of the famous things that this gentleman said is that evil runs through the heart of everybody. Everybody is capable of good and evil, and it really just kind of depends on the circumstances that you're in. So if the organizational circumstances are such that evil or bad action against the organization just doesn't have the incentives, or it's just not possible, then that's a way of staving off insider threat. So anyway, that there's a question in there somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. There's a few questions, but
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I did listen to that podcast. It was fantastic, and I listened to it very intensely. I thought there was some good possible kind of cohesion there, and then actually to the point of the kind of the fertile ground for insider not existing is exactly why we looked for associating this in a more positively inclined direction, right? So insider risk, insider threat especially in Europe, they have very negative connotations because of the privacy focus here. And so having something that's a bit more, I guess, positioned in a way that is trying to secure the people, right? It is trying to secure the people from things that might happen to them they may not be, knowing about. And to your point, I think in terms of the history, the things that we have learned throughout history in human security, there's been a kind of this arc, as I discussed earlier, where we can see the complexity of human risk, and you look at all of the cases that we can all sit here and cite, and there are patriots in the camp that become spies. There are good people that do bad things, not because they're bad people, because they get themselves in a coercive or compromised position. And so I think our approach to this is how do we do something to help them not get in that position? How do we get in a better mindset where they understand that becoming coerced is the first step in a recruitment process, um, so that we don't go down this road, or we have at least some indicators along the way to more expeditiously take this to the law enforcement authorities, right? And use that as a deterrent. A faster corporate response done in a kind of an anonymized way allows an organization whose purview kind of ends at, I think, crime discovered, and it makes it quicker by having a clear handoff to the law enforcement authorities.
Right. So you were just describing what sounded to me like one variety of insider threat. People who are recruited by others to do the bidding of some other entity or actor. But
Yep.
um, I'm sure that's not the only kind of insider threat. Do you think maybe you could take a moment and describe what the different kinds of insider threats there are, and
Right.
then maybe after that we can talk about like ways of identifying those different types of threats, or mitigating it. So please take that in whatever direction you think is productive.
Yeah, so a couple, I guess, 3 points I want to make on this one, at least initially. Point one, I did a discussion last year to about 200, people, and I asked everybody, hey, raise your hand if you've ever felt like an insider, right? An insider is somebody who has some knowledge, they know how things work. Who has ever felt like an insider? And of course, we saw no hands go up because no one ever feels like they're an insider. And I told the story about how I got locked out of my house and essentially use the internet, right, to Google the door type and find manuals to essentially get myself back into my house. Now, was I wrong for wanting to get back into my house? Was I doing something criminal or malicious? No, not really. But I mean, essentially, that's what an insider is. An insider is somebody who has essentially means and ways into an organization. Now, where they become a threat, right? Sometimes it's just through let's say, um, you know, t- using bad cyber or just bad security hygiene, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
People pushing buttons they shouldn't push, or some of this is just natural, accidental, right, or negligent kind of insider. But insider actually, it goes when you go into the more malicious and purpose-built side of the spectrum. It actually goes into things like terrorism, criminal, kind of more criminal conduct, and of course it goes all the way up to like espionage, right? But it's this idea of you know purposeful, malicious actions, looking to harm an organization for the gain of this entity that's trying to exploit that. And I guess the third thing I'll say on this is that you know I think that the challenge, as I said earlier, that with insider, right? People often don't. People say, "Oh, we need to do something about the insiders," and they kind of point to everybody else. And until we can recognize that we're all essentially insiders because we've all made mistakes,
Mm.
we're all imperfect, and so we're all vulnerable to some extent. Until we can start to take that ownership and say, "Hey, we humans, we people, we need to be secured." And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do, is trying to pivot it into a more positive direction and help people see that if you've got critical assets, right, like your crown jewels, you protect them, you invest in them. And I think that's kind of one of the main things is how do we then invest in people so they become and they have a stronger security culture, among them. So that's kind of my answer there.
Okay. Um, I guess this is maybe a little more of a philosophical question or something, but you mentioned GDPR earlier. Do you think maybe you could, as you're answering this question, explain what GDPR is and when it came about and all that kind of stuff a couple of years ago? So that's number one. But philosophically, um, why do you think that uh, GDPR and these kinds of privacy rights, what's different about Europe than America, and why these same kinds of what do you call them? Not guidelines, regulations, laws.
Yeah.
Why these same kinds of laws are not implemented in America or other areas of the West? Do you kind of get what I'm asking? But back to like organizational,
Yeah.
setting the conditions within an organization. If you think of Europe as an organization, what is the soil? What is the climate like over in Europe that set the conditions to create these GDPR regulations while that same kind of thing is not being done in America? So again, take that, answer that in whatever way you think is going to try to unpack it.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously America, and I'm American, and I miss home all the time, right? But I also love my new home here in Europe, and so I think it's important to recognize that, like culturally, where the two come from are very very different, right? I mean, the European kind of mindset, I think, gives a great ability to respect others' privacy and to not press into, um, so and so is sick. That's the end of it, right? There's no like, what do you have? I need to see a doctor's note, right? It's very much about ensuring that the individual isn't put into harm's way by society. And the way they've solved it in Europe is by these kind of European Union based directives and regulations that usually start out in a way that's kind of trying to give some guidance and structure, because there are, I think 27 member states in the EU. So that does complicate it, because the EU is not this kind of sovereign body. It's essentially a coordinator. So they have to get the buy-in. It's kind of like a mini NATO. They have to get the buy-in of those 27 states to get a regulation to a place where they can adopt it locally. And this is a whole nother level of complexity that we typically don't have in the US. So we want to kind of project, well, it's kind of like the states in the US. It's quite different, actually. I mean, there's a very clear order in the U.S. federal regulations. The way we have solved privacy challenges and other challenges, even Computer Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Act, has been very much omnibus in the U.S. So we are not omnibus, but very much sector specific. So sector specific regulations are what we have seen a lot of in the U.S. And this is, both approaches have pros and cons. But we've seen more states, pushing for privacy laws, like California, New York, and others.
Mm.
And I think part of that is there's a demand for limiting the ubiquitous information that's captured on an individual on a given day, right? So there's a desire by society to kind of say, we want something, and so it starts sometimes in the U.S. at the state level and moves up. But we haven't seen really the omnibus approach in the U.S. that we see in the European Union.
Yeah. Uh, I can definitely understand the desire and need for these kinds of protocols and I guess laws and stuff. But yeah, the other side of the coin, right? I'm sure there are uh, lots of people who would, just scream out, gosh, I don't need the government, passing these kinds of laws. I mean, this makes stuff harder, right?
Yeah.
It's harder to conduct commerce. It's harder to be an employee and work. It's more stuff for me to just be mindful of. I mean, life is hard enough already. Work is hard enough already. This is just throwing the sand in the gears of commerce and just going about pursuing our goals. Yeah, I mean, what do you say to people who make a good faith kind of a you know, counter argument like that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think both the U.S. and Europe, they approach it from a similar position, and I think we see holistically, to some extent, even fatigue from organizations who are big enough to do these things.
It's
The
costly too, right?
it's costly because you have to have people that know these things, and I mean,
Yeah.
it's complex. How do you comply with
And it can
laws
it,
and
it, it can it can stifle innovation too for like
yeah,
a small startup business. It's like, come on, I'm I'm trying to do something and get this into the marketplace, and you want me to do what? You want
yeah.
me to spend how much money to be XYZ compliant? Sorry to interrupt there, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, there are some provisions for smaller and medium sized
Yeah, yeah,
organizations,
yeah.
but I think, I mean, to your point, right? I think there's certainly a compounding effect on organizations from the enormity of regulations that they have to comply with, especially in the space of insider and human domain security as well as cyber. And part of that is, that's an artifact of this kind of stacked approach. And we've never really gone back and said, let's go through these laws and make them simple, straightforward, and meaningful. And one of the things I like about GDPR, and all of the other, uh, modern privacy regulations is they all stem from the same basic privacy by design principles.
Mm.
And I think if organizations are trying to comply with a lot of different, regulations, having principles that all regulations like this are kind of based on make it much easier for them to do a faith-based approach on being compliant, And I think more than just being compliant, organizations are trying, and we're seeing this a lot. Organizations, because of the threat we're seeing, are trying to not just set the floor at compliant, but they're trying to set the ceiling at what can we do to be, proactively providing real security, meaningful security to the business. And that's where it becomes tricky, right? As you're trying to balance business requirements, right? Bottom dollars driving value, and you've got something that's just kind of taking away the value you can provide to consumers. So it's a really tricky balance, and I think it's going to take a little while for Europe, and the U.S. both to kind of look at how to solve that. It is not an easy process. It's very political. There's a lot of equity invested in this, so I think it's a complex issue that will remain for a while. And so
Hmm.
I don't think we're for or against how
Hmm.
it's solved, but I think we see some very clear opportunities to simplify. And that's kind of what we try to help people understand is how do we reasonably approach solutions to this. If we're not letter of the law, but we have a good faith-based approach, then certainly that has some value.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, on a couple of different occasions during our discussion here, you've used the word complex or complexity, or that various versions of that word. Um, and I don't recall if I talked with John Roginski about this or not. I'll have to go back and listen to that episode myself. But um, I'm curious if you and your colleagues have uh, examine this problem or approaches to solving these problems or managing implementation and mitigating risk through a like a complex systems lens, which is kind of its own analysis domain. And let me just explain what I mean by that. So and by the way, to our audience, I would love sometime to have somebody on the podcast who has done some deep thought about the concept of variety. And there's a complex systems, it's either a hypothesis or a theory, which is called the law, or it's a law. The law of requisite variety is what it is. And what it basically says is that the variety of activities, or the variety of engagement opportunities contributes to the complexity that an organization has to manage. And in order for an organization to survive, it must be able to counter all of the various different activities which are coming at it. And that's everything from, new competition. It must be able to counter that competition in order to survive. It must be able to counter like brand attacks. And there's a whole bunch of ways that organizations and brands can be attacked these days. And in order to survive, you must be able to successfully adapt and counter those varieties of attacks. But also, like internally to this discussion, an organization must be able to counter or absorb a whole bunch of different ways that it can be attacked. So in a complex systems context, I'm curious if you and your colleagues have just thought about that as a lens through which to manage this problem set.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And that's a great question, John. I mean, I think it is something that we're seeing more and more organizations come to terms with, right? VUCA, right? We understand,
Hmm.
you know, we
Do you think you
understand the
could just explain VUCA to our
yeah,
audience?
VUCA. So velocity, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think organizations are understanding that the nature of the market, the nature of the threat, the nature of this, shareholder requirements, right, is shifting so frequently. It's going to take a bit of a different mindset. One of the things for complex organizations that I have, personally seen work really, really well, is simplicity, right? Simplicity drives the value. It creates a very easy to follow approach, and it's kind of like NATO or the UN or these other organizations that seek to establish a kind of a standard or a norm. It's how they build that coalition of the willing, right? And that's
Hmm.
what I think organizations that are complex need, is that very, very clear, simple view on what they need.
Hmm.
And we had we had a complex challenge about a year ago. It might have been a little bit more than a year ago, and we just broke it back down into you know risk is the result of a threat and a vulnerability compounded by the impact, right? And we said, okay, we're not going to define the risk. We're going to establish, no, and this is me using, going back to my military days, most likely and most dangerous courses of action that an adversary might use. And let's frame it between most likely and most dangerous and see what the probability of something like that happening might be, right? And then let's look then at the vulnerability. Just because a vulnerability exists doesn't mean it's taken advantage of.
Hmm.
So, you marry the two up, you look at the probability of the threat, you look at the likelihood of the vulnerability, and you then understand kind of an impact. And in business, it's great to have a dollar, or a euro symbol ahead of that. to make it really understandable. And then again, just keeping it simple. If you want to do something about this risk, what is the cost? And
Hmm.
you know, if I don't take this action, what is the cost? And then it's very clearly frames, you know, you're talking about dollars, you're talking about it costs you this much money to prevent losing this money. If you take this action, it costs you money, but you don't lose millions. If you don't take this action, you could stand to lose, a lot.
Yeah, right. No, okay, no, that's a really, really helpful framework. I'm sure that your clients appreciate. Um, do you guys have some kind of like a scorecard or something like that that offers some tries to offer some sort of like an objective uh, grade for various different aspects of the insider threat human human landscape within organizations?
Yeah, so I mean, we have kind of a custom one, but I think
Hmm.
for the audience, especially for researchers who are looking for more principle based, approaches to kind of really get to the ground truth on where we are deriving our ideas from. There's a MITRE is a great organization. They spend a
Mm-hmm.
lot of time and energy, a lot of gray matter thinking about these problems, and they put together. I think it was about a year ago, maybe a bit older than a year ago. They put together an insider threat framework, right? And it's pretty good. And I'm aware that there are other efforts afoot to because one of the main things we understand, and I'll make this really clear to the audience, is that human threats and human threats that are enabling cyber cannot be looked at through a cyber lens, right? We have got to change the paradigm. What is it that we're looking at? We're not looking at cyber activity. We're looking at, what does the cyber activity tell us about the human threat, right? Or the human vulnerability.
Hmm.
So I think frameworks like MITRE's is a great place for folks that are interested to start. And there are others, but I think leave it there for now.
Yeah, yeah, and to our audience, there'll be a link in the show notes to some resources along to the MITRE's knowledge base and framework if you want to check that out a little bit more. Well, this has been great, Hatteras. So perhaps we can maybe transition into a few lightning round kind of questions and then close it out. Does that sound
All
okay?
right. Hey, sounds
Yeah.
great.
All
Yeah.
right. All right. Lightning round. So, uh, uh, a lot of John Bicknell sidebars during this discussion, so apologies for that. The lightning rounds, I started doing the lightning round about a year ago or so with the intention of it being like 30 to 60 seconds per response, but they rarely work out that way. So it's lightning round ish, lightning ish round. So whatever, take as much time as you want, but first question. Yeah, what are a few actions that we can do as a society or as an individual around this problem space?
Yeah. So, I mean, immediately I think of, the impacts and how artificial intelligence are going to start to really impact this space, right? And, you know, I learned a long time ago that if you want new ideas, you should read old books, right? Because a lot of the clues in old books are already there. They give us clues, right? So one of the things I think we as individuals, as parents, and as members of societies, we need to start to understand and practice critical thinking. And this is, in facilitated discussions, making an argument about one side and being able to make an argument about the other side as equally exciting and passionate, right? That takes critical thinking to really think about an alternative perspective, and I think that will really have constructive impacts on society. We talked about privacy a bit, but I think it's also really important for society to be really awake and really thinking about the balance between privacy and security, right? You can have You can have security without privacy, but you can't have privacy without security, right?
Mm.
So you have to have one or the other. And actually, 2023, the Dutch government released their national security strategy, and one of the quotes out of that was absolutely brilliant, right? Security is an essential precondition to society, and I think that is so absolutely spot on. Security is like oxygen and water, you know, and I think we need to understand that like we should still want privacy, right? We shouldn't expect that what we whisper in the closets be shouted from the rooftop,
Mm.
which is an old privacy legal scholars position. So I think we need to understand the balance between privacy and security. I think we need to study and practice critical thinking more often. And then finally, I think we need to understand as individuals how we provide resilience to others and where we look for our resilience. It makes a stronger fabric across organizations, families, and I think it will have a very positive impact on society.
Okay, cool. Next, you might have touched on some of this already, but just to double down or reinforce, what are your biggest concerns in this problem space?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think we have grossly, maybe even inadequately assessed this always working, always on, this industrial, being industrious, we have people working in critical operations roles, right? We've got the potential of diminished trust with artificial intelligence. We're always switched on, devices are always on, we're always available. And there's other disruptive activities, and I don't think we fully understand the impact on people, right? I don't think we fully thought through the impact on people, and then start to put in some solutions to, so right now solutions aren't even on the table because we're just answering emails on our phone, and everything is just on our phone, and I think that has an actually a pretty big impact on what I consider our greatest assets. We talked about the misnomer that people are the weakest link, and I want to replace that. In cyber and in other security practices, you often hear, oh, we're going to talk about this in terms of people, process, and technology. Most people think that's alphabetical, but I think people, process, and technology is listed in order of priority.
Okay, all right, yeah, no, that's a great perspective on that. Um, what advice would you give to a team who is wanting to, or maybe they're just embarking on this adventure, or they're needing to secure their human domain? You know where do I start?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reality is, in terms of scale, it's going to work much quicker and much easier on a more individual level. And the answers don't have to be complex, right? So you don't have to have super complex, cyber SEM logs, triggering and pulling in physical security. We don't need this really We can start quite simple, right? um, checking on your people, checking on your staff and your workforce, and understanding the things that are helping them be successful and the things that are preventing them from having success, and finding ways to enable that. It starts there. It's really, really simple, right? From a threat perspective, I think we should consider that, and again, this is really simple, but if you are trying to log into something and you get access denied, the first thing I'm thinking as an attacker is human required, right? So what humans in your organization have the access that would be provided as part of a access as a service type of deal with some of these threat groups. And then, yeah, as mentioned, I think we need to really prioritize people. I think people are the solution. I think people that walk around that are naturally curious and go, hey, why isn't that device plugged into this thing? Because that's where we get our information from. Wouldn't that be more beneficial? Maybe there's a good reason, but oftentimes the question just doesn't get asked. So it's about, to me, if you want to start understanding your people, and what is enabling them and what's prohibiting them. And then if you want to go up the complexity ladder and really get technical, there are certainly ways to do that.
Yeah, and uh, it's just now occurring to me, and our audience is going to be like duh when I say this, but there really is something important, or something. Innovation happens when people get together and exchange ideas, challenge one another, banter back and forth. That's how innovation happens. The human brain is still the most important, innovation device that's ever been developed.
Absolutely.
Ever, right?
Ever.
as
Ever.
as as far as we know. So this whole discussion that we've been having, I mean, you can think about it also as an innovation enabler by setting the conditions within an organization so that it's a safe place, people can work relatively undistracted. There's not a whole lot of stray voltage going on. There's not little ankle biters and or big upheavals that are coming in to disrupt the operationalization and the work and the innovation process. And so getting what you're talking about right is actually like an innovation enabler, which is of extreme importance at this moment in the Western Enlightenment project. What's your take on all that?
I love that perspective. I love that perspective, and I could not agree more. I mean, we can again. I'm a history guy. I love reading about history and understanding these exact topics from across history. And you can look as far back as Pericles, right? An Athenian guy who basically saved this what would become this idea of democracy, right? George Washington um, was an incredible counterintelligence guy, right? He really understood the importance of it. So there's a lot of high potential looking backwards on where people have said, hey, we've got to really prioritize one way or another. We've got to really prioritize how people interact and can function, because it is exactly what you said. That drives the innovation. It drives the creativity. It brings in fresh new solutions. I mean, this goes back to the critical thinking point, right? And it also strengthens our ability to be critical thinkers as individuals and as society.
Yeah, cool. You've mentioned you've got some military experience as well. I mean, just a really interesting set of experiences. But what's something about you that most people don't know?
Yeah, uh, that's that's an interesting question. There's the obvious ones that I probably won't share on the podcast here,
Okay, sure.
but I think, but what I'll say is, I think some of the interesting things that many people don't know is that my first professional career was actually as a master electrician and lighting designer for Performing Arts Center in Vermont. If somebody said today, if you could do anything in the world and not do security or not do cyber, what would you do if money wasn't, well, I'll tell you, it's still technical. You still have to deal with like, complex issues. I mean, if you think security is complex, try just single lighting an orchestra, right? Everyone's got some
Mm-hmm.
complaint about just a white light. So to me, that's probably the most interesting thing about me that
Yeah.
most people don't know.
All right, cool. Well, what what time period was that, by the way, in Vermont?
Yeah, that was late 90s. I think I left there around 2001. So yeah, and actually I left there in 2001. I went and my father's kind of graduation gift to me. I graduated college was to raft down the Grand Canyon, and
Really?
we
Wow.
were down we were down the Grand Canyon for like 3.5 weeks, and we were down there during 9/11, and
Mm.
we popped out on like September 24th, and the world had changed, and that was really the catalyst that drove me to go join the military.
Wow. And that might have actually been before. Did you not know the news of 9/11 until you popped out of the canyon?
We had heard tidbits. We noticed there were
Wow.
no contrails in the sky.
Really?
There was kind of signatures that something was going on, but we didn't really truly know what was going on until about 2.5 weeks later.
That's old school there.
Yeah,
That's the before times.
yeah,
Wow. Okay. No, that's an interesting vignette. Okay. Well, kind of wrapping up in our typical fashion, do you think you could maybe offer a fruitful research question that an interested student might examine should they want to, you know, add some to the body of knowledge of in this problem space?
yeah. So I think I've got two that kind of come to mind, and I'm a researcher by heart. I love study and research and putting thoughts together. One of the things I've encountered a lot, and I think researchers will be well positioned to potentially, bring this forward, is some kind of empirical evidence that shows across the different kind of technical, administrative, and physical controls that kind of show retrospectively how behavior can be captured over the period of a case, right? Take any case that's ever existed, and if there's any kind of that data, some kind of empirical evidence that shows that, yeah, this person who was clocking in at 9 and going to his computer by 10 minutes later, that was suddenly something that we could look back on and go, okay, there's the evidence. We could see the change
Hmm.
between the 10-minute span and now a 40-minute span, right? We could see the printer rates go up or whatever it is, right? Some kind of true scientific data, or hopefully based on more applied science and realistic information, but
Hmm.
possibly anonymized. I think that would be a great, especially for our statisticians and people who are in the, data science and machine learning. I think that would be an incredible topic.
You know,
I think the second,
so that kind of analysis doesn't exist yet, or not to the satisfaction of being actionable or yet. Is that right?
yeah, I think the reality is the information often is looked at as quite sensitive information.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah. Mhm.
having a lot of it, is exposing. So I think, for a researcher to be able to do this, I mean, this would be a huge, this would take, people with the right kind of connections,
Oh, right.
that would be able to say, hey, look, we're going to anonymize everything, and we're going to, what we want to do is we want to see whether or not our theory that you can actually retrospectively see the change in behavior. We want to actually test that theory, right?
Right. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, so I don't know, some of the I've yeah, I've seen some of the research criteria on, using humans in research, and
Yeah.
there's a huge barriers and red tape. Yeah, in a good way, right? There
Yep.
are some guardrails that have to be put in place around
Absolutely.
this kind of research. And
Yeah.
don't just like let her rip with SSNs and employee IDs and real names and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, okay,
Right.
cool,
Right.
cool. I think you mentioned two,
I had,
right?
yeah. The second one. So I think, right now we are living in this current world of artificial intelligence. It's kind of everywhere. I don't know how it is in the US, but I know here, every second conversation is, how are you using AI? What are you guys seeing in AI? How's AI, part of your professional offerings? It's kind of everywhere, right? But if you were to look kind of 10 years into the future, what are those disruptive technologies that are coming down the pipe, and based on history, right? Based on history that we could maybe forecast and see. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about, bioengineering and how that is going to completely change the world, and how
Hmm.
far and how rapidly that world is advancing. And I'll be honest, it's hard for me to even fathom, bioengineering that's going to allow us to have automated, cells. It's wild, right? But it exists, and I think, understanding what that next disruptive technology will be, from a human perspective based on history would be an incredible research project.
Hey, all right. Well, I hope some people are inspired by those suggestions and contribute accordingly. Lastly, do you have any a book or online resource, or it could just be what's on your nightstand now? Some things that you might recommend to the audience to check out.
Yeah, yeah. I like to prepare for these types of discussions,
Yeah, yeah.
and I reached out to Chris Hadnagy, who wrote the one book I'll recommend here, Social Engineering: The Science of Human Hacking. And it's a really great read. It's down to earth, it's consumable, it's very practical. And I think when I reached out to him, I said, "Hey, you mentioned something in there about kind of distinguishing between manipulation and influence. Can you, is that how does that still work?" And I think it was a really important kind of hint drop in there, because the work that he's done in this book really helps kind of shed light on the difference between something that's coercive and maybe over the top, and something that's really trying to help somebody arrive at a better destination. But I think he's got a bit of a more. So I don't know if he's got a new book coming out, but it was a fantastic read. And then another one I'll just throw out there, that I'm reading at the moment, and I'll make sure you have a link to this.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
Is Multipliers. Multipliers is a book about how we as leaders can have a multiplying or a diminishing effect on our people, right? And multipliers, sometimes they're intentional and sometimes they're actually unintentional, in the sense that they're maybe even taking away from what they think they're doing. But it's a great book on how to lift up an organization, and to me, it's kind of part and parcel to what human domain security is all about.
Okay, excellent suggestions. Wow,
Yeah.
and fantastic conversation. And with that, Hatteras Hoops, thank you so much for being a guest on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much, and fantastic experience. So, yeah, look forward to hearing more podcasts for your team.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.